They not like us. You know, I was told a while back, maybe about 4 years ago, to always listen and open, be open minded when you are getting ready to fall asleep and when you're waking up, because your subconscious is able to talk to you, is able to get through to your conscious mind a lot more easily at that moment. And so a lot of the epiphanies that I have, or the thoughts that I have, or the questions that fuel some of the little audios that I do, they happen as I'm getting ready to go to bed. They happen sometimes when I'm getting up in the morning and I record these little snippets. Well, this one that I just thought was about to-do lists. And, I guess the inner child in me said, man, all these to-do lists, why isn't there a to playlist? And I wasn't meaning a playlist like a music playlist, but a to playlist like a recreation list. And that got me to thinking about a post that I made a while back. And I was talking about how there are a lot of men that will brag, oh man, I'm never going to grow up. I'm just a big kid. And they are very proud of that. And they're very, I guess, adamant about it. And they feel that that's their right. And when I made this post, I was so confused by that. Like, that made no sense to me. Like, I had no frame of reference for that. And I think it goes back to that statement. Why is there always a to-do list and never a to-play list? And that takes me back to childhood. I remember distinctly being 10 years old. And prior to that, of course, I had chores, but the chores were very minuscule in my mind. I had to go to school, come home, do my homework, and maybe clean up something, my room, the dishes, whatever, vacuum. It was a very minor thing. It took 20, 30 minutes at the most, and that was it. And just a part of my day, not something I ever really thought about that much. But I remember when I was 10, my mom got pregnant with my sister, and for all intents and purposes, that's when my childhood ended, because when my sister was born, my parents were working, and I literally became her babysitter, her caretaker. And even to this day, she doesn't do it as much as she used to, because, I kind of had to say, hey, stop. She will call me mom, because at 10 years old, I was given way too much responsibility for her, and for cooking and cleaning and making sure that a lot of things that I hadn't necessarily been tasked with prior to that time, making sure those things got done, because they did seem to become my responsibility. And I realized that I am not unusual in that very often the oldest sister or the oldest daughter in a family will become the surrogate mom, will become the person who's, doing a lot for the younger siblings. And that it used to be very common. I don't know if it's as common now for girls to be parentified. And I'm not saying that boys are not, but I'm talking about what's common. We wouldn't even be having this little audio if it were common for boys to be parentified, because the whole point of me making this statement is that boys were encouraged to just be boys. Boys will be boys. But girls were encouraged to be prepared for motherhood, and be prepared for responsibility, and be prepared for helping out around the house and making sure that everything was taken care of, even at a very young age. And so that is why I couldn't relate to men when they would say, I'm never going to grow up, or, I'm just a big kid, because I very distinctly remember my childhood ending. I very distinctly remember feeling like now I have a lot of responsibilities and I have a lot on my plate and I have to get these things done because this is my duty, my job, my obligation. And playtime is over. Playtime is over. Childhood is over. Games are over. That's done with. And, you know, as people unlearn some toxic things, a lot of us are realizing that parentification is very insidious. There's a big difference between preparing a child for life as an adult and giving over a lot of your parental duties and responsibilities to that child when they're not emotionally, physically, mentally really ready for them, and it causing them to be sometimes overwhelmed and, again, sometimes anxious and stressed and all these other things. So once again, I just think that we have raised boys and girls very differently, and that's some of the gap, that's some of the miscommunication, that's some of the problem that men and women have in understanding one another, because there's such a big gap. If my child ended at 10 and his never ends, that's a huge gap. That's a huge gap in mindset. That's a huge gap in skill set. That's a huge gap in really the entire set of priorities that we come to a relationship with, that we come to life with, you know? And I think it makes a big difference in how people respond to one another. And I think I'm now at 55 years old, and I'm beginning to make play a priority. I'm beginning to make recreation a priority, because for the majority of my life, at least maybe 44 years of my life, work was the priority. Responsibilities and duties and, obligations, that was the priority. And play was not even very much on the list. It was something, every now and then I would work on or enjoy or bask in, but definitely wasn't prioritized. So I think we have to come to a healthy balance. There has to be a balance between work and play. There has to be a balance between